The phone call came in at 3:22 a.m. The voice on the other end was shaky, frantic, and barely coherent. They're all dead," the caller whispered, struggling to breathe between sobs. "I couldn't stop him. I tried to, but he's still out there." It was a chilling confession, but it wasn't the confession of a murderer. It was the plea of a woman who had been trapped by a man she barely knew. Someone who seemed ordinary, someone she trusted. And yet, in the cold, dark hours of the morning, he had already claimed 14 victims, women whose names the world would soon forget, their lives erased in a haze of violence and deception. As we delve into this video, don't forget to like this video, share with friends, and subscribe to Murder Files for more delve into true crime stories. Before we dive into the twisted mind of the killer, it's important to remember the names and lives of those he took. The victims, women from all walks of life, each had a story, a family, and a future that was abruptly stolen from them. The first woman who went missing was Maureen Brainard Barnes. A 25-year-old woman from Connecticut, she was in the middle of a personal crisis, grappling with relationships and her career. On a summer evening in July of 2007, she stepped out for a meeting, never to return. For months, her family searched for her, holding on to hope, desperately asking for any leads, but it wasn't until years later that Maureen's name would be linked to a string of other disappearances. Then there was Megan Waterman, a 22-year-old woman from Long Island. Megan was a mother, working hard to support her young daughter. She had dreams of a better life, of stability and happiness. But one night, in May 2010, she vanished without a trace. Her disappearance was met with the same confusion and lack of leads that clouded the other cases. But the police soon realized that Megan, too, was part of something bigger, a pattern that would come to define the chilling narrative of the Gilgo Beach killings. Lastly, we must remember Amber Lynn Costello, a 27-year-old woman who had struggled with addiction. Amber was a sex worker, one of the many women who would unknowingly find themselves in the killer's sights. She had been last seen on a late summer evening in 2010. It was Amber's body that would eventually be the key to cracking open the case, a pivotal piece of evidence that would lead to the horrifying truth. The pattern was undeniable. All of the victims shared similar circumstances. They were young women who had been living on the edges of society, marginalized in some way. The killer was hunting in the shadows, picking off women who were often overlooked or ignored. And it wasn't just their lives he stole, it was their stories, erased as though they never existed. The authorities began to connect the dots. The women's bodies were found in similar locations within a 20-mile radius of Gilgo Beach. They were all murdered in different ways, yet there was an eerie consistency, something that suggested the killer was not only methodical, but also remarkably careful in his selection and disposal of the victims. By the time investigators were piecing together these women's fates, the killer had already claimed a terrifying number of lives. But he was far from finished, and the investigation was just beginning to scratch the surface of the nightmare that would unfold. For months, the disappearances were brushed off as isolated incidents. Missing persons reports were filed, but they quickly became cold cases. The women had vanished, and the police were left with few leads and even fewer answers. It wasn't until bodies started surfacing along the desolate shores of Gilgo Beach that the authorities realized they were dealing with something far more sinister. The first discovery came in December 2010, when police stumbled upon the remains of 4 women along a remote stretch of coastline. They were hidden in the thick brush near the beach, their bodies discarded as though they were trash. As the investigation progressed, it became evident that these were not random deaths. Each woman had been left in the same horrific manner, positioned in similar ways, almost as if the killer was sending a message. Soon, a chilling pattern emerged. The women were all found within a 20-mile radius, scattered along the same stretch of highway. Their bodies had been carefully concealed, but the details in each case, how they were bound, the methods of murder, suggested that this was the work of a serial killer. This was no longer about random disappearances. This was deliberate, methodical, and terrifying. As investigators combed through the crime scene, they realized they were dealing with a predator who was not just violent, but smart. Someone who knew how to avoid detection, someone who had carefully planned each killing. The timeline stretched back several years, and as the bodies continued to surface, the fear grew. Who was behind these killings? Why had they targeted these women? And how long had this monster been hiding in plain sight? With no solid suspects and very few clues, the investigation hit a dead end. But the killer wasn't done. He was watching, waiting for the next opportunity to strike. And as the bodies piled up, one thing was clear. The hunt for the truth was far from over. Rex Heuermann's killings were not random acts of violence. They were deliberate, calculated, and disturbingly ritualistic. Each murder followed a chilling pattern, one that revealed just how methodical and sickening the architect's mind truly was. The first clue to Heuermann's signature came from the state of the bodies themselves. Each victim had been carefully positioned after death, their bodies discarded in secluded locations along the same stretch of road. At first, the authorities struggled to find any common thread, but as the victims piled up, it became clear that Heuermann had a preferred method of execution and a specific way of leaving his marks. It was as if he were creating a twisted scene, an eerie artwork of death, with each body serving as a piece in his macabre puzzle. All of the victims were sex workers, though many of them were trying to escape that life, hoping for a better future. Heuermann's victims were often vulnerable, desperate for a way out, but they had one thing in common. They had been lured into his trap. Heuermann stalked these women, carefully watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. His modus operandi was chillingly efficient. Heuermann would use his online personas to contact the women, pretending to be a wealthy businessman or someone offering help. He would set up meetings under the guise of companionship or paying for sex. Once the women arrived, they would either be drugged, strangled, or both. His killings seemed to follow a pattern. No frenzied overkill, just a brutal and calculated process like a ritual he had perfected over time. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of Heuermann's killings was his tendency to pose the bodies after death. The victims were found in specific, almost ritualistic positions, their faces twisted in silent terror, some of them even placed in the fetal position or arranged in ways that suggested a grotesque sense of control. The positioning of the bodies wasn't random. It was a message, a mark of ownership. Heuermann had taken something from them, and he made sure that in death they would be his forever. What made the killings even more unsettling was the escalation in the violence. Each murder grew more violent, more gruesome than the last. Heuermann's confidence had been building over time, and with each victim he left more of his fingerprint on the scene, more traces of his psychotic control. It was as if he were pushing the boundaries of what he could get away with, becoming more brazen, more reckless in his pursuit of power over life and death. In a particularly chilling discovery, one of the bodies was found to have evidence of a post-mortem attempt to disguise the crime. Heuermann had gone to great lengths to cover up his tracks, but his arrogance seemed to outpace his caution. He was becoming too confident, and in his mind, he could do no wrong. He had managed to evade the law for so long, and now he was leaving more and more clues, subtle hints that would eventually lead investigators straight to him. By the time the police realized the full scope of Heuermann's killings, the true horror of his actions became clear. He wasn't just murdering women, he was controlling their deaths, turning them into his personal victims, their lives snuffed out and left as evidence of his dominion over life and death. Each victim became a pawn in his sick game, a game that would eventually bring him to justice. But for now, his killing spree continued unchecked, his confidence growing with each crime he committed. As the bodies continued to surface along Gilgo Beach, the investigation into the murders grew increasingly urgent. The police knew they were dealing with a serial killer, but they were trapped in a web of confusion, unable to connect the dots. The evidence, although chilling, was sparse and fragmented. For years, there were no leads, just endless dead ends. But that would change when the investigators zeroed in on a crucial breakthrough. It wasn't until the discovery of Amber Lynn Costello's body in 2010 that a key piece of evidence fell into place. Amber's body was found closer to the roadside, and her death seemed to have a different feel to it compared to the others. Detectives began to look at her case more closely, and through the meticulous examination of her last moments, they discovered a vital clue: her phone records. Amber had been in contact with a man who would later prove to be the key to unraveling the entire case. The calls Amber had made in the days leading up to her death revealed a disturbing connection to a man named Rex Heuermann. For years, Heuermann had been active on various online platforms, seeking out vulnerable women to lure into his trap. He had used different aliases, masking his true identity, but it was this one phone call that would begin the unraveling of his double life. Detectives managed to trace the phone number used by Heuermann to arrange meetings with Amber. The fact that he had contacted a victim only days before her death raised alarm bells within the investigative team. The breakthrough was sudden and terrifying. Rex Heuermann, the unassuming architect, had somehow slipped under their radar, operating in the shadows with an eerie precision. Now, with this new lead, everything changed. The authorities turned their attention to Heuermann's background, combing through his personal life, his history of internet searches, and even his work records. The more they dug, the more they realized just how careful he had been in maintaining his facade. Heuermann had been operating right under their noses for years, and yet he had managed to avoid detection at every turn. As detectives dug deeper, they discovered that Heuermann had been active on online dating sites and forums, using fake identities to communicate with women. They also found evidence linking him to other missing women. Surveillance footage taken from a nearby area showed a man who closely resembled Heuermann at the scene where one of the bodies had been dumped. Each discovery painted a clearer picture. The killer was intelligent, calculated, and eerily meticulous in covering his tracks. By this point, the investigation had moved from a chaotic search for answers to a targeted manhunt. With DNA evidence and the mounting circumstantial evidence, investigators were beginning to see a way forward. However, the question remained: would they be able to catch him before he struck again? Rex Heuermann, once just a shadow in the police's investigation, was now in their sights. But the monster who had been hiding in plain sight for so long wasn't going to be caught easily. The investigation had entered a dangerous new phase, and the police knew they had to move quickly before Heuermann could vanish once again into the darkness he came from. The breakthrough in the investigation came when police linked Rex Heuermann to Amber Lynn Costello's murder through phone records. This discovery propelled the investigation forward, and on July 13, 2023, Heuermann was arrested at his home in Massapequa Park, New York. The man who had concealed his monstrous nature for years was finally exposed. The arrest shocked the world, as Heuermann was revealed to be one of the most notorious serial killers in modern history. Heuermann's arrest was only the beginning. His trial unfolded as a chilling spectacle. In the courtroom, the prosecution presented damning evidence: phone records, DNA, and testimonies from survivors. Heuermann showed no emotion, his face devoid of remorse. As the victims' families recounted their grief, Heuermann remained cold and distant, his eyes often vacant. The defense attempted to argue that Heuermann's actions were due to mental illness, but experts quickly dismissed this, asserting that his crimes were driven by an insatiable desire for control, not mental instability. The jury found Heuermann guilty on all charges. Despite the defense's efforts, the evidence was overwhelming, and Heuermann was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His lack of reaction to the verdict only further solidified the chilling nature of his character. For the victims' families, the conviction provided some closure, but the trauma of their loss would never fully fade. As Heuermann was led away, the question remained: how many more like him might still be hiding, unnoticed, in plain sight?
Rex Heuermann's capture and conviction marked the end of a chapter, but the aftermath left lasting scars. The victims' families struggled to find peace, their lives forever altered by the brutal loss of their loved ones. Heuermann's prison sentence ensured he would never harm anyone again, but the emotional wounds remained. The case also sparked discussions about law enforcement procedures and the effectiveness of online surveillance. Heuermann's ability to blend into society without suspicion revealed chilling gaps in how authorities track dangerous individuals. His crimes, now immortalized in documentaries and books, left a haunting legacy. If you found this case as chilling and unsettling as we did, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Stay informed on more gripping true crime stories, investigations, and the dark minds behind them. Your subscription helps bring these untold stories to light. Don't miss the next one.